Welcome to the second presentation I call Daniel's Messiah. In the first presentation, we talked about two key areas in Daniel 8. First, in Daniel 8:19, where Gabriel gives the summary of the vision as a total. And the four things: the end, Christ's death on the cross, the wrath of God, which he took upon himself, a biblical feast, the Passover, and the end of the Old Covenant people as God's only covenant people. And then in Daniel 8:13, there is talk about the time, when, how long is it, and when is it fulfilled? And we figure out that all four of them ends at the cross. So now the question is, when did he start? Let's go to Daniel 8:14. I'm going to read from my New King James Version, which I usually use. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. 2,300 days. Well, in the footnote, it says the literal translation would be evenings and morning. So the Hebrew language, it does not say days. If you will look at all the translations we have, this is only so done by King James and the New King James versions. But the interesting thing is, even these two, when it comes to Daniel 8:26, where it talks about the vision that concerns the evenings and mornings, they don't write days, they write evenings and mornings. So there, every single English Bible translation I've found has the words evenings and mornings. Because the word days they use in 8:14 with the exact same expression has not to do with the 24-hour day period. But Daniel knew very well the word days. For example, in verse 27, he said this period refers to many days in the future. And here he does not use evenings and mornings, but the word for 24-hour day. In the next verse, 8:27, again, the same thing. He was exhausted for many days. Again, does not write evenings and morning or that specific words, for evenings and morning, Ereb and Boker. No, he doesn't. He used the 24-hour word for it. And the same is happening in Daniel 12, verse 11. The prophecy there is for 1,190 days, and 1,290 days, excuse me, and 1,335 days. And again, not evening and morning words, but the word for 24-hour day period. So when Daniel uses that in Daniel 8:14 and in 8:26, there is a very specific reason for it. The next question we might have is this one or a two, one composite unit or two units? If we look at 8:14 alone, we won't figure that out. But if you go to 8:26, it literally says, and the vision concerning the evenings and the mornings. That means as a definite article before both these words that supports that we're dealing with a two-unit thing and not a one-unit things. If we go to Vine's expository dictionary of biblical words, make a long explanation of it and so on, because the word morning in English could mean the whole morning hours from breakfast, whatever, when you go up until lunch, but that's not what it's talking about. So the correct wording would be dusk and dawn in the English language. But we have this concept used several times in the Bible. We can, for example, go to the creation story in Genesis 1 and verse 5. And then God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And then it ends. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Here they write, my New King James Version, the evening and the morning, but here it's not. So we can ignore that. For some reason, they wanted to do that. I don't know. But the interesting thing here is were the first day, not was. If this was a composite one unit, then they should have used was in singular, but they used a plural word for were. So we also use the same concept many times in our own life. Let's just take one example. If you meet a teacher and you ask him, how many students do you have in your class? And if he says, I have 10 boys and girls, it could be that he has 5 boys and 5 girls, or 6 boys and 4 girls. But he definitely don't have 20 students, 10 boys and 10 girls. No. He has 10 students, and that's what he's saying, with a mixture of boys and girls. So many examples like that. We use it in daily life still. And another example in the Bible is Elijah. When Elijah had this wonderful victory on the Mount Carmel, and then he fled and was tired and didn't know what to do with himself. He was afraid of King Ahab. Then he was camping out by the creek, and there it says that God fed him morning and evening. And in the morning, the ravens came with bread and meat. In the evening, the ravens came again with bread and meat. So he had 2 meals a day, bread and meat in the morning, and 1 meal with bread and meat in the evening. So if that has happened 3 days, he has had 3 mornings meals with bread and meat and 3 evenings meals. Exactly the same. That means he has had 6 meals with bread and meat. But it's only happened during 3 24-hour periods. So that is the same concept as in Daniel 8:14. When we as a family lived in California, I lived not far away from a very famous theologian, Dr. Raymond F. Cottrell. So we became friends, and I met with him many times during the last 5 years of his life. And we talked. And he gave me this personally in my hand. And it's about King James mistranslations of the Hebrew text. By the way, if you want to read exactly his words, you can have to go to my book on free downloads and go to Daniel's Messiah. And there in chapter, I think it's 2 or 3, you will find it. But here it says, the traditional interpretation of Daniel 8:14 is based on 3 erroneous King James Version renderings of the Hebrew text. We're only going through one here, the first one. In a sanctuary context, he continues, as here in Ereb and Boker, evening, morning, always, without exception, refers to the evening and morning sacrificial services. Always, without exception. And it never means anything but that. And he says the same then, in his words, the same as dusk and dawn, but refers to the evening meals. The evening and morning sacrificial services. And then he continues a little bit later and says, with 2 continual burnt offerings each day, 1 Ereb and 1 Boker, 2,300 of them would be offered in 1,150 24-hour days. Very clear. That's exactly also what the Bible is saying. But the example I've given you so far. So this is the length we're going to study now. Now I'm going to put up the PowerPoint presentation. And now we're going to read this verse 14, Daniel 8. And here I have NIV. He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. That was a tough word for a Swede. Sorry. Yes, so this is the timing, the 1,150 days. But why do they use the word reconsecrated? Because when I looked up, you have it all below the line there at the bottom of this PowerPoint presentation. The word used here should be according to the dictionaries, and I have the Big Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew Lexicon and also Strong's Dictionary. And what I did, I listed all the possible options how to translate this word from Hebrew. Just read with me, look with me. To be just when it comes to God, to be righteous, to appear righteous, to turn to righteousness, to make right in moral or forensic sense, to justify, to declare someone righteous, and to be justified, to justify oneself, and so on and so on. You see all the possible alternatives. And do away by the sea, also to save. I was thrilled when I saw it. But every single word here, expression or short phrase, fits perfectly to what happened when Jesus died on the cross. But why do they use the words like reconsecrated, cleansed, or restored? Because they believe it refers to the buildings, the temple building, the sanctuary. But we already studied that and showing that Christ said in Isaiah 8, God says in Isaiah 8:14, that God will become a sanctuary. And in Matthew 12, verse 6, Jesus said, here is one greater than the temple, and he talked about himself. In John 2, verses 19 to 21, they talked about the temple building, and Jesus said, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. And they ridiculed him for this. But then it says he talked about his own body. And in Revelation 21, verse 22, we can read, there is no temple in heaven, because Jesus Christ and the Almighty, they are the temple. So, and what we've done already in Daniel 8:19 and 8:13, we have all the right to use what the dictionaries are writing out here. And every one of them fits to what happened at the cross. So the right understanding is then the end point is at the cross. So let's read this with this concept one more time. He said to me, it would take 1,150 days till Jesus Christ will be declared righteous. And this is the truth. If you go to verse 26, we found that done in a different way. Because what does it say here? The visions of the evenings and the mornings, I add that now, that has been given you is true. Well, I'm sure glad God is not any falsehood you write in your prophecy. Well, no, I'm joking. That's not what it is he's saying. It's about the truth, Jesus Christ. John 14:6. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Yes. So when the word truth or true comes in a context like this, we have absolute all the right to think Jesus Christ first. So when did it start, this time period? So let's go. So if Messiah is the main fulfillment of Daniel 8, then I believe that Daniel 8's prophecy ended 31 AD, in the middle of the last week, according to Daniel 9. That means we need to find the starting point as well. But how do we find that? But Jesus' time of ministry was of tremendous importance, since everything we believe in happened during this time. And we put all our faith into the trustworthiness of his ministry. The time of his ministry was the most important historical time ever. That's what I believe. If he would not have been successful, the whole world, the universe, whatever, would not have been cleansed from sin. But praise God, he was victorious. So the significance of his ministry and death should not be and cannot be diminished. But wouldn't you be surprised if this was not mentioned anywhere in the Bible? One person told me there's more than 300 prophecies about Jesus' first coming in the Bible. And I believe that because I've read it several other places as well. But the duration of his ministry isn't mentioned anywhere. Now you see what we talk about. Let's go in and look carefully at the time of Jesus' ministry. We're used to say, well, it lasted 3.5 years, and that's okay. But if you're going to do it really carefully, we need to follow what Jesus said himself, because he defines his own ministry in Luke 4, verses 18 and 19. And I read, and there he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me." Yes, he was anointed by his baptism. Right after, the Spirit descended on him and remained. But what does he say? How does he define it? To preach good news to the poor. Well, that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yes. And the second thing, proclaim freedom for the prisoners. According to my knowledge, he never went to a real prison and released criminals, no. But many who were in prison because of sin or tradition, wrong ones. Recovery of sight, yes, both literal and spiritual. Many couldn't see what Christ tried to show them over and over again. Recovery of sight, yes. And the fourth one, release the oppressed, either from sin or wrongful traditions. So that is very clearly defined. But then it also says in verse 19, the next verse, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. But then you say, well, his ministry was not only a year. That's correct. I agree with you. So what does this word mean? If we go to Louw-Nida, Greek lexicon, it says clearly, and all the other dictionaries too, a unit of time of indefinite length. It can be much shorter than a year or also longer. So the context has to decide. And the interesting thing with this dictionary is continue to say, to proclaim a favorable time of the Lord, that is to say, an era in which the Lord bestows his favor, and refer to Luke 19. Yes, the specific time of Jesus' ministry. So it refers to the whole period, the whole time of Jesus' ministry. Well, let's look at what happened then. Did Jesus start preaching the gospel right after his baptism? No, he didn't. It says immediately after his baptism, he was led out to the desert, to the wilderness, and he fasted and prayed for 40 days. And then we have the temptation from the devil, or maybe it started earlier, but that's not the point here. And then it says also he was very hungry. And this is the last cry from a body who believes it's going to die soon because, well, it can't cry out literally, but you know what I'm saying. Medically, when you have this strong feeling of hunger, you're just about to die. So that bad it was. But even during this time, Jesus was victorious when it comes to the temptations. But my point is, then it says in Matthew 4:11, is the angels came and attended him. So they didn't do a miracle. They slowly gave him the food he needed to slowly get started with the intestinal tract and how it works naturally for all of us otherwise. And it took, I'm sure, at least a week, maybe more, because otherwise, if you eat right away as usual, you will die. So that took another days, a few more days than the 40 we're used to. Then it happened that Jesus heard the news about John the Baptist, who was put in prison and killed. And Jesus, John the Baptist was a relative to Jesus and also the forerunner to his ministry. So he took that very seriously, sadly. And then it says in Matthew 4, verses 12 to 13, that he returned to Galilee. In the next verse, it says he stayed in Nazareth in Galilee for some time, but we don't know exactly how long. But some days are going here. And thereafter, it says he went to Capernaum by the lake. And that's if in Matthew 4, verses 12 to 13. And we also can read later on there in verse 13 to 16 there, the light that his ministry started there. The beginning of Jesus' ministry was announced. But we can also read that he moved to Capernaum. And everything was because it should be fulfilled, what's said in Isaiah 9, verses 1 and 2, the prophecy about Jesus, that the light would dawn in the land of Galilee by the lake of Gennesaret, by the lake of Gennesaret, yes. And this is where he needed to be to start his ministry. And let's look at what happened before. Because on his way there, when you walk, for example, from Nazareth to Capernaum, in those days you had to pass Cana. And we know for sure in John chapter 2 that Jesus was there with his mother, and because it was a wedding and they were invited. And in those days, the wedding lasted for many days, several days, maybe a week. And it was not unusual that the resources came to an end. In this case, it was the wine. So she came to him and sort of wanted him to do something, a miracle, I assume. But then Jesus answers something very strange and interesting. He answered, "My time has not yet come." What time he's talking about? Whatever he's referring to, it hasn't come yet. Was he a liar? Was he a hypocrite? Because he did a miracle, turned water into wine. No, he wasn't. Of course not. Did a miracle was on his list in Luke 4:18? No, he wasn't. So he could very well have done a miracle on a wedding to help out of love, but it was not part of his ministry because his time had not yet come. But then, by the way, at that time, the 3.5 years had started already. And he's saying, my time has not yet come. And then we mark chapter 1, verse 15, we had the same thing, that his ministry started at Capernaum. And there doesn't say exactly until the next verse, in verse 16, where it says he walked along the seashore in the Sea of Galilee. So with that, Matthew 4 and Mark 1 is in harmony with Isaiah 9, that the ministry, the light, should dawn there. And there's also is one place he says that he moved to Capernaum. So after the temptations, he went to Nazareth and stayed there some time, and then he moved to Capernaum, and there the ministry started. So we're looking for a time now, which is shorter than 3.5 years, because it obviously not started when he did the miracle in Cana. So we need to look for the 2,300, now I call them dusk and dawns, the 1,150 days of his ministry. So now we're going to put up and now we see the PowerPoint presentation again we just read. And we read about the 2,300 evenings and mornings, and it is true and refers to Jesus Christ. Now go to the next presentation, and we do like that, and I move this outside a little bit so you can see. Here I have a chart showing the last 7 years of the 490 years prophecy from Daniel 9:24. And the 7 years is the same as 2,520 days. And we know from there in Daniel 9:27 that Jesus died on the cross, and there the sacrificial system ended. So that means we have 3.5 years before and 3.5 years after. But we just talked about it here. And I'm going to go over that again with this one so you can follow me. His 3.5 year ministry or time started in the fall of AD 70. But after his baptism in the fall of AD 70, he went into the desert for 40 days and fasted and prayed, and his temptations came, and then he was tended by the angels. So let's put 40 days here up. Was probably a little bit more than that. Then when in next 40, the red color here is described here. By the way, you can find this on my homepage. You can go there on a free download and Daniel, and you will see this here, and you can print it out and have it for yourself. And I advise you to do that. Then he talks about what happened afterward, that he went to Nazareth for a few days when he heard the bad news of John the Baptist. He also went over Cana and made a miracle, and his time hadn't started yet. And then he came to Capernaum. So after a total of about 80 days, he came to Capernaum, and there his ministry started. There, the 1,150 days of his ministry started. And that means it's a very accurate time period, mathematically. But it's even more than the days, because it actually says 2,300 evenings and mornings, so dusk and dawns. And that's every 12 hours. There is a sacrificial system was practiced. So that means the accuracy of this ministry is plus minus 6 hours. So actually, if someone would understand this prophecy before Christ died on the cross, it would be able to predict exactly what afternoon or morning that would happen. That is the accuracy. And then in the middle of this 7 year period, he died on the cross. And that gives us 1230 days here, and then that explains the 1290 days afterwards. Even that is mathematically correct and no problem. So with this interpretation, we can see that Jesus' real time of ministry is the fulfillment of Daniel 8 and precisely predicted several hundred years before it came to pass. So Jesus Christ, his first coming as Daniel's Messiah, is the epitome of Daniel 8 and 9. Thank you and welcome back.